Owning a convertible supercar typically comes with a fair bit of compromise. You generally pay more for something with less structural rigidity and more weight. But in 2024, supercar manufacturers are out to prove that you can have your cake and eat it too with a convertible. McLaren has already pulled off the seemingly impossible with the brilliant new 750S Spider, and now Ferrari is out to do the same in Australia with this. It's called the 296 GTS. It's a V6 hybrid supercar, and of course it is a drop top. So it poses a very first world problem for prospective buyers. Would you have this or the 296 GTB that it sits alongside? I guess I better find out. The 296 GTS continues a rich lineage of mid-engine convertibles from Ferrari, while also breaking new ground with its 610 kilowatt hybrid powertrain. With the roof up, it looks a lot like the hardtop GTB released in 2023. But wait 14 seconds for the top to drop, and the GTS preserves the same wonderful lines while adding another driving dimension, and one that buyers can expect to pony up an additional $100,000 for over the equivalent GTB Coupe. Ferrari says a lot of the design here is inspired by the Le Mans winning 250 LM from the 1960s, and a lot like that car, you'd have to argue the proportions and design here are classic and timeless. But what we're also seeing is a really clever technical execution. The GTS weighs only 70 kilograms more than the existing GTB Coupe. 65 kilos of that is down to the roof and the mechanism that controls it alone. Then we have an additional 5 kilograms worth of bracing. Now that's been inserted here in the A pillar, the B pillar, but also in the door sills. Ferrari argues that the torsional rigidity here is more or less carryover with the GTB, and this car is only 8/10 slower around their test track in Verona. 0 to 100 takes just 2.9 seconds, with a top speed rated at 330 kilometers an hour. The GTS's insubstantial weight increase over the GTB meant it didn't require the adoption of stiffer spring rates or anti-roll bars, but the dampers have been recalibrated to compensate for the drop-top's slightly different roll characteristics. And thanks to the hybrid portion of the powertrain, the 296 GTS can travel up to 25 kilometers claimed on a single charge. And that is where we begin this journey in electric mode. So I will just press this starter button. It gives you a bit of an electronic yelp, along with a few dings, which is sort of customary in a lot of new cars, even supercars. And away we go. So at the moment, I'm using the electric component of the drivetrain. Ferrari claims about 25 kilometers in electric range. When we picked this up, it had 22 kilometers displaying. And I reckon that's largely rung true in reality in terms of what we've got on the road, about 22 k's in electric range. It's quite convenient, if I'm honest. It's very different from a traditional Ferrari supercar. You're normally awaiting the sound of that combustion engine to really wake to life to let you know the car is going. But in reality, it's kind of nice. Like, we had a really early departure this morning. I was able to pull away on neighborhood streets in complete silence, and no one knew that I was driving this thing about, which is kind of nice if you want to fly under the radar, which doesn't really make sense for a Ferrari. But anyway, the electric component of the drivetrain works really well. I'm in typical stop-start traffic at the moment. The throttle pedal is really nicely modulated. The brakes are really easy to get the gist of. Nice consistent pedal action. You can feel that there's a little bit of meatiness there in terms of braking power, but in terms of the day-to-day amenity, they work really well. The other remarkable part of this car is just the sereneness of the cabin with that roof stowed. As we said, 14 seconds for the roof to go down. I've got the windows up, and you're still kind of closeted away from the elements. Creates a beautiful alfresco style driving experience. This rear screen here you can have up or down. It's another really nice, neat feature with the driving experience. If you want the top up but that rear screen down, it allows you to hear a little bit more of the engine which we'll get to in a moment because it is an absolute cracker. The other thing to mention here in terms of day-to-day amenity is the hydraulic front lift function. It's commonplace on a lot of supercars, and on this one it's been really handy with speed bumps, with driveway entrances and things like that. I find that for a $700,000 Ferrari, I'm doing a lot less grimacing inside the cabin than I used to, because it's normally a really stressful experience. But this is about as easy as it gets. In short, the GTS feels taut and controlled in regular driving, while the hybrid powertrain lends a new level of real-world efficiency for a Ferrari, even if the 6.4 litre per 100k claim is a bit ambitious. Well, this is much more familiar territory for the new 296 GTS, a beautiful winding country road, not that far removed from the kind of road you'll find around Maranello in Italy. Beautiful little plunging valleys, blind crests, tight radius corners, open corners, a mixture of everything, and a perfect playground to test the wares of this car. So what's it like? Well, I've got to say, I am really surprised at the breadth of capability in the new 296 GTS. Like the GTB, the engine here is a surprising highlight. You read it on paper, hybrid turbo V6, certainly doesn't have the same ring to it as V12, but it is an absolute masterpiece of an engine. And I've got to say, it provides so much more theatre than I was expecting. I would argue probably even more theatre than the F8 Tributo, that is almost like the spiritual predecessor to this car. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So here we are, blind crest, third gear. It definitely meets the crescendo very quickly, but turbo whoosh aside, it is an engine that just provides awesome open top theatre and thrills. This is a big ticket price for entry, but the engine more or less validates it. It sounds amazing, it's visceral, and it provides pretty much punch everywhere. There is the odd occasion where a large capacity engine is going to give you a little bit more linearity through the range, but through the middling revs and as you rev it out, this thing piles on speed incredibly. So refined, so polished, and so theatrical. That is a huge surprise to me because I did not expect it from a V6. Ferrari engineers have sort of called this a Piccolo V12, and the way that this one sounds, the way that it performs, you can see why. But engine aside, this is a really well put together car. It is, I dare say it, a consummate all-rounder. Because yes, it does that low speed amenity really well, the day-to-day driving, the very sociable EV drivetrain. But then on a country road, it feels anchored, it feels tied down, it's flat through corners. It is so pointed and razor sharp in the front end as well. And it's giving very little away in terms of rigidity. You can probably see through this camera a little bit of wobble and flex, which is really pronounced when you have a camera mounted to the windscreen. But from a driving perspective, it's doing everything I ask of it. Really easy to place on the road, super sticky and tied down to the surface underneath, and all strung together by a sharp gearbox and a really willing electronic suite that almost fool you into thinking you're a much better driver than you are. Look at this, open radius right-hand corner. I can go almost flat to the floor through that corner before I've even finished the exit, because I know the electronic nannies are going to do their job. They're going to stop this car from spearing off the road. They are making me look much better than I really am. There is no doubt about that. And as a driver, they almost give you a valuable safety net to know that you're in safe hands. Punting through some of these roads is just incredible. The turn of speed with which you can attack some of these corners, the ease in which this car just effortlessly approaches turns through and dispatches corners is otherworldly. It is absolutely incredible. Now, yes, the easy thing to do here would be compare to other cars. I'm not going to make that final judgment call unless you have all those cars in the same place. But to me, this feels just as pointed, just as theatrical as the 750S Spider from McLaren. I think there are instances where this is probably a little bit more clinical and offers even more feel and tactility than its British counterpart. And that's a big thing because I really like that car. But what I love about this car is that you can drive it like an absolute hooligan, speed limits permitting. And then there is another side to it. It's like I switched to electric, I can hear the birds chirping, things have slowed down, and it's almost like it gives you an opportunity to think about what you've just done. It's like the equivalent of getting home after a long day's drive and your brain starting to compute what actually happened. You're in this moment now able to savor exactly what you're doing. A beautiful Italian supercar on countryside that has an Italian feel to it. This is one of those experiences that teleport you away from reality. It's incredible. I'm not by any means a electrification fan. In fact, I'm probably the opposite. I'm a huge proponent of V8s, of internal combustion. But in this instance, the concept of a V6 plug-in hybrid Ferrari is coming to me much easier than I thought it would be. This is like the best of every world. Yes, you lose a tiny bit of rigidity, but you're effectively getting the performance of the GTB Coupe, the speed and ferocity of a V8, V12 engine even, but with green credentials and a much more sociable plug-in hybrid drivetrain that allows you to be an absolute hooligan in some settings, flick a switch, and no one would really know that you're around. I'm really enjoying this, so much more than I thought I would. This is a very complete, very well-rounded Italian supercar. Probably more than I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. Now, with all of that said, there are a couple of little intricacies with this car that have probably been less redeeming. So when you're in EV mode, you can pick up on the wobble and flex through the windscreen a little bit more. It is ever so slight, but it's definitely not going to be mistaken for the GTB Coupe in terms of that rigidity through the A-pillar and so on. There's a little bit of noise coming into this car as well. Just a very slight kind of creak that's emanating its way through the cabin. Earlier this morning I sort of picked up a very soft knock in the front end as well. I had a look underneath, I couldn't tell if it's suspension or something else, but these are all features worth mentioning on this particular test car with about 3,500 kilometers on the odometer. Aside from that, everything here feels well put together. There's one piece of trim near the door sill on the left-hand side, where the materials don't quite add up. I'd be expecting a little bit more for a $700,000 supercar, but all those things aside, from a driving experience, this is an incredible supercar. It is a car that puts a smile on your face, and it is a car that sort of encourages you to rethink what a Ferrari is. Because this can be a wailing supercar, full of theatre, full of sound, but it can also be so much more. It's definitely encouraging me to think about it differently, and I've got to say, there's a deeper experience with the 296 GTS, and I'm a huge fan. Now, much like the car itself, the interior of the new 296 GTS is a great blend of old and new. Some really cool throwback cues, including this H-style pattern shifter with some of the controls. They do control a lot of the gearbox functions, but cleverly integrated into that old H pattern style. But then we have the new digital display, haptic controls everywhere, even a digital screen for the passenger in this particular test car. They look great. I've got to be honest though, The haptic functions themselves aren't all that intuitive. I've spent about 200 kilometers in this car already. I'm still trying to work things out. And what's more, yes, you do get features like Apple CarPlay, reversing camera and all the rest, but it's all integrated into this instrument cluster, which makes navigation a little bit tricky when you're steering a $700,000 supercar. Now, of all the ways to describe a Ferrari, being well-rounded isn't exactly top of the list, but I have to say, this is one of the defining features of the new 296 GTS. It is a very complex, some would say, not all that pure way of doing a supercar, but it really is the best of both worlds as a coupe and as a convertible, and mounts a really strong case over the GTB despite that hefty premium.